What's up, everybody? It's me, Alone. I hope you're doing all right. Today, let's talk about The Elder Scrolls 6. I know how crazy it is to even mention this game, given how far out it probably is. Starfield was only released last year, and Bethesda Game Studios is still working on DLC and official mod tools and bug fixes for that game. So in all likelihood, we are not receiving The Elder Scrolls 6 anytime soon whatsoever. However, that certainly hasn't stopped news and updates coming out for the game, and that includes old bits of news and also more recent ones that have come out just in the past couple of weeks. So in today's video, there's a number of things that I want to cover. First of all, I do want to do a bit of a general summary and catch up in terms of how things for The Elder Scrolls 6 have progressed over the years, ever since it was announced all the way back in 2018. Yes, it was 2018, it feels like a distant memory right now, but we are talking that far back, almost 6 years ago now. So that's first up. Second of all, I want to talk about Bethesda Game Studios coming out and saying that they are currently playing early builds of The Elder Scrolls 6 right now, which is crazy to say out loud. They could have even been playing it as you're watching this video right now, as we speak. And that makes me so jealous. But anyways, that's what they're doing, and we need to talk about it. But also 3, there's been some recent chatter in the Elder Scrolls Online space that I want to talk about, and how essentially that team, because they are working on chapters for ESO, and they're actively developing the lore of the Elder Scrolls franchise, how essentially they are helping or assisting Bethesda Game Studios when it comes to the Elder Scrolls 6. So there's a lot to cover in this video, a lot to talk about. If you enjoy it and you want to see more Elder Scrolls videos from me, please like, subscribe if you're new, with notifications if that's possible. But let's go back to that announcement all the way back in 2018. Specifically, it was on the 11th of June at the Bethesda E3 press conference. Do you remember E3? Those used to be fun times. And this was actually the same night that Starfield was announced too, which is also crazy to say because Starfield was released last year and we're seemingly nowhere near the release date of The Elder Scrolls 6. That is a talking point, and I'll talk about that in a second. But first of all, this is what Bethesda Game Studios had to say in the description of that announcement teaser trailer. Quote, "Currently in pre-production at Bethesda Game Studios, the acclaimed developers of Skyrim and Fallout 4, the highly anticipated next chapter in the iconic The Elder Scrolls series." So if you remember that teaser trailer, it was very short and it didn't really include any kind of information. It didn't say what the game was specifically going to be called, just that it was The Elder Scrolls 6, right? It didn't talk about the setting or the basic top-line plot points or anything like that. All it was them saying, we are making The Elder Scrolls 6 and it's in pre-production. Now, at the time, I wouldn't say that people were upset or anything. In fact, there was a lot of hype around that trailer. But as the months and the years have gone on, people absolutely have started to question why Bethesda Game Studios decided to announce it then. And overall, did they announce The Elder Scrolls 6 too early? Especially with them knowing that Starfield was going to be their next project, and that's going to be the game that they were releasing next, and it came out last year, and it was also delayed, mind you, a little bit as well. If they knew that at that stage, and they knew how far out potentially The Elder Scrolls 6 was, why did they announce it at that stage if we're going to have to wait all these years to even hear more about the game? Remember, that was almost 6 years ago, and we're potentially talking from now another 4, 5, possibly even 6 years if it gets delayed until we see The Elder Scrolls 6. So that's been a big talking point. It's been a big reason as to why people have been upset about that announcement. And Todd Howard has been asked that question in an interview with GQ back in August of 2023. He was asked, "Do you regret announcing that when you did?" And this was his answer. Quote, "I've asked myself that a lot," he says slowly. "I don't know. I probably would have announced it more casually." So it's interesting because Todd doesn't just talk about when they announced it. He also implies, there was an issue with how they announced it. Because yes, when they announced it in hindsight, and hindsight being 2020, of course, but it was over 6 years ago. So it was a very, very long time, right? So the timing is absolutely a factor. But also too, it was absolutely how they announced it. They included this, let's say, CGI trailer. Even though it was short, it was still this trailer at this big press conference, at their E3 press conference, which attaches a certain level of importance to the trailer. It would have given some of an impression that this game was at least closer than 10 plus years out, right? If you look at when it was released or announced in 2018, from that stage, we're potentially talking 8 to 10 years. And I think when you include a trailer like that at a big press conference, and we weren't used to Bethesda Game Studios announcing games so far in advance, I think a lot of people got the impression that maybe this is closer than we think. Maybe Starfield's coming out in the next couple of years, and The Elder Scrolls 6, maybe a little bit after that. Maybe max 6 years. So I think it was the manner in in which that they also announced it, but also the time had a factor as well. So because of that, it seems like Todd had some regrets. And in hindsight, maybe he would have just talked about Starfield, announced it at that event, and then maybe name dropped The Elder Scrolls 6 in an interview or in an article or something like that. Because if you remember, they did that with Fallout 5, and no one is here questioning or getting angry about how he announced Fallout 5, right? He casually name dropped it in a random interview just to say, hey, yeah, we are working on Fallout 5. And maybe in hindsight, he would have done that with The Elder Scrolls 6. So it didn't give it that level of importance, and so people aren't getting so upset about a trailer. Now, I do want to try and, call it defending Bethesda Game Studios or whatever, but I do want to provide some rationale and some speculation on my behalf as to why they would have announced it then. Because let's put yourselves back into the shoes of you or whoever's watching that show back in 2018, right? Just imagine they didn't talk about The Elder Scrolls 6. All they did was announce Starfield, saying this is the game that we're making, and then that's it. They went absolutely radio silent on The Elder Scrolls 6 and whatever their next game could have been, right? Imagine if they did that. I absolutely would have expected the internet to lose their shit, because there would have been a good subset of people that would have been like, where the hell is The Elder Scrolls 6? I don't care about Starfield. I don't want a space game. I want my follow-up on Skyrim. I want another game in the Elder Scrolls franchise. I don't like The Elder Scrolls Online, da-da-da-da. I think absolutely that would have been something that they were trying to prevent by including the announcement in that press conference, right? And yes, in hindsight, was it too long ago? Should they have changed the manner of that announcement? Absolutely, but everything is 2020 in hindsight. It's easy to go back and judge now, and I think that is what their rationale was at the time. And I understand that, because absolutely people would have been pissed off. There's no denying it in my mind that people would have been angry that The Elder Scrolls 6 wasn't even recognized in that press conference, right? So I think there are good things to argue on both sides. I always try and cover both sides of the argument in my videos. But that's what I think. That's my speculation as to why they did it when they did. So even if it wasn't just the timing, maybe if Todd didn't talk about The Elder Scrolls 6 at the press conference and just name dropped it in an interview like he did with Fallout 5, maybe that would have been better. But you can't change the past now. We are where we are. So next up, let's talk about Elder Scrolls 6 absolutely being the next game after Starfield. So they've said this in many different ways. I'll look at this interview with Todd Howard with IGN back in June of 2022. This is what he had to say. Quote, Elder Scrolls 6 is in pre-production, and we're going to be doing Fallout 5 after that, so our slate's pretty full going forward for a while. So not only in that interview did he confirm what his next, or what their team's next projects are going to be, so Starfield, Elder Scrolls 6, and Fallout 5 after that, so we know the progression, but also as well, he also confirmed still in June of 2022 that The Elder Scrolls 6 was still in pre-production. If you remember, in that announcement teaser, they said back in 2018 that the game was in pre-production. And still in 2022, in June, it was still in pre-production. So to me, that suggests that there hadn't been much progress made on The Elder Scrolls 6. It would have had a very small team. The bulk of BGS absolutely would have been on Starfield. So there would have been no real meaningful progress on developing The Elder Scrolls 6. But still, we are going to be getting The Elder Scrolls 6 after Starfield. With Starfield releasing last year, it will be the next project. So let's see how long it takes, right? Now, there is another statement that I want to mention if we move forward another year. This is in August of 2023. Pete Hines made some comments about the development of The Elder Scrolls 6, and he didn't use the term or the phrase pre-production. So this is what he had to say in that interview. Quote, it's in development, but it's in early development. No time soon are you going to be hearing anything at all about The Elder Scrolls 6. Starfield is our focus for now and will continue to be our focus for some time before we talk about anything else. Now, at that stage, in August of 2023, of course, Starfield is much closer to being released, right? So absolutely, I think there would have been even more progress on The Elder Scrolls 6 at that stage. But was it enough progress to take it out of pre-production and into some sort of early development? These terms and phrases are very nebulous. I don't know what they mean. When one developer says it and another developer says it, they can mean very different things depending upon the company that you're talking about. But I think maybe Pete Hines was saying that there has been a little bit more progress on The Elder Scrolls 6, even though everyone's probably crunching on Starfield, because he didn't use the term pre-production. Maybe that's me, pulling at straws. I don't know. Let me know what you think. But at least I thought that statement was noteworthy. But now let's talk about the release date. When could this game actually be released? So we know that Zenimax was acquired by Microsoft or Xbox, and they were acquired for like $7.5 billion. It was a big deal, a lot of money. But because Microsoft decided to also try and acquire Activision Blizzard, they were taken to court, right? They attracted a lot of scrutiny from the FTC. And as part of that trial, a lot of documents came out, a lot of information. We've talked about those a little bit on my channel in past videos. However, there was this one chart, right, which is titled Microsoft's Approach Following Acquisitions Since 2018. And in there, you have a bunch of essentially Bethesda Softworks games in there. So some from Arcane, some from Bethesda Game Studios. So you have the Elder Scrolls 6 listed there, and there's some general information like whether it's an existing IP, a multiplayer game, da-da-da-da. But here's what they say about the release date. To be confirmed, but expected 2026 or later. So this was them saying to the court in some sort of document or chart that 2026 is probably at earliest when the Elder Scrolls 6 could be released, right? However, in that statement or in that line, they did leave it open a little bit. They did say it was expected 2026 or later. So if it was delayed or pushed back, they're essentially covered in that situation. But that's what they had to say. However, there is no way the Elder Scrolls 6 is coming out in 2026. Absolutely no way. As we know, Starfield was delayed. And because Starfield was delayed, that absolutely has a roll-on effect when it comes to the Elder Scrolls 6, or let alone any other BGS project from then on, right? When Starfield was delayed, Elder Scrolls 6 was also implicitly delayed as well. So is this 2026 date relevant or accurate at this stage? Absolutely not. And in fact, in 2023, at trial, this is what Phil Spencer, head of Xbox, had to say specifically about the Elder Scrolls 6. With Elder Scrolls 6, it's so far out, it's hard to understand what platforms it will even be on at this point. It's the same team that's finishing Starfield, which comes out this September. So we're talking about a game that's like 5+ years away. So even though in that court document or in that table, it said the Elder Scrolls 6 could be releasing in the year 2026, this is Phil Spencer under oath at trial saying, no, it's probably like 5 years plus away. So if he said that back in 2023, we are talking about a potential release date of 2028 at least. And if you go back to that original announcement in 2018, we are talking 10 years from announcement to potential release date, which is a very, very long time. Crazy to say. It's unheard of, especially from BGS, which tends to like to announce their games in close proximity to the release date. But they didn't really do that with Starfield, and they absolutely haven't done that with the Elder Scrolls 6, if this holds true. So it's crazy to say, but we are a very long time away from the Elder Scrolls 6. However, that is certainly not stopping Bethesda Game Studios from playing early builds of the game. So let's get into that next. In March, Bethesda Game Studios tweeted out the following for the 30th anniversary of the Elder Scrolls. This is what they had to say. Quote, "Happy 30 years of the Elder Scrolls," and they included this attached image. I'm not going to read absolutely everything, but I want to start from this point here. Last but not least, yes, we are in development on the next chapter, the Elder Scrolls 6. Even now, returning to Tamriel and playing early builds has us filled with the same joy, excitement, and promise of adventure. Thank you again for supporting us all these decades and all you have brought to the games, making them your own. We couldn't be more excited to continue it and celebrate the next 30 years, Bethesda Game Studios. So when they released this tweet, absolutely everyone lost their collective minds. And it was a big deal, right? This is them coming out and saying in 2024 that Elder Scrolls 6 is in development. They didn't use the phrase pre-production or early development or anything like that. They straight up said development. So a good portion of the people at BGS clearly now are on the Elder Scrolls 6. Now, as I said, people are still working on Starfield. It might even be the majority of people still working on Starfield. They're doing the DLC and all that stuff that I mentioned. However, it seems like people have absolutely moved on to the Elder Scrolls 6, and as the DLC winds down, as the mod tools come out and all that kind of stuff, people will keep continuously moving on to the Elder Scrolls 6, and then it's really in development. But they didn't use the term early development, they said development, so I'm going to take that, right? So that was the first big thing. But secondly, of course, they're literally saying they're playing early builds of the game, which everyone was like, what the hell, you're literally playing the Elder Scrolls 6 right now? And I saw some people refer to that as them saying the Elder Scrolls 6 is in a playable state. And I need to talk about that right now because I think there's a lot of baggage that comes with the term or the phrase playable state. And I think it's incorrect to attach that to the Elder Scrolls 6 at that stage or at this stage because, again, we know how far out the game is. The game is not coming out, according to Phil Spencer, for another 5+ years. When I describe a game as being in a playable state, to me, I think about a game that is like close to being ready for release, right? It is pretty much playable from start to end. To me, that's what I think of when I see the term or the phrase playable state, right? And I don't think that is exactly what Bethesda Game Studios was saying when it comes to describing the Elder Scrolls 6. I think, as I said, there's too much baggage with that term. All they said is that they were playing early builds. And if you have ever played an early build or a vertical slice of a game, you can't call that a proper game. You can't play from start to finish. I wouldn't describe that as being in a playable state. I think that term is too nebulous, is too broad. You might disagree with me on that. People are like, tomato, tomato, playable state, early build, same crap, right? I get it. But I just don't want to give people the impression that this game is somewhat close to being released because someone said on the internet that it's in a playable state. I wouldn't say it's in a playable state. There's an early build. They're testing out things. Like, there's one build maybe with a side quest, and there's another build testing out a new mechanic or the character progression or something like that. You know what I mean? There's different builds that they'd be playing, but I wouldn't say the game is in a playable state by any means. So that's what I have to say about that. But finally, let's talk about the Elder Scrolls 6 and the Elder Scrolls Online team. So recently, there was an article, an interview that was done with Matt Firor of ESO, who essentially was asked a lot of questions about the Elder Scrolls 6 and lore. And I'm sure he didn't like being asked those questions because that is Bethesda Game Studios' realm. They're developing that game. That's Todd Howard's baby, right? Like, they are working on that game. And Matt Firor is dealing with the Elder Scrolls Online. So I can feel like that he's probably a little bit uncomfortable being asked those questions. However, I think it's still fair to bring up once or twice in these interviews because there's a lot of chatter, there was a lot of chatter at least, about how essentially the Elder Scrolls 6 was probably delayed a little bit and not made immediately after Fallout 4 because ESO was so popular and it was doing so well for the Elder Scrolls franchise and for Bethesda that there probably wasn't this incessant need to release the Elder Scrolls 6 next. So this is what Todd Howard had to say again in that same interview with IGN in 2022. Quote, "And we felt pretty good with where Elder Scrolls was as a franchise, particularly with Elder Scrolls Online, that now was the time we could do Starfield." So essentially there, Todd Howard is saying, if ESO wasn't a thing, maybe we would have had more pressure to do the Elder Scrolls 6, right? If there wasn't this big MMO constantly releasing chapters every year, developing and expanding upon the lore of the Elder Scrolls franchise and all that good stuff, we probably would be more likely to be doing the Elder Scrolls 6 as opposed to taking a chance and a risk on Starfield, right? But because ESO is doing its thing, because it's very, very popular, it's one of the top MMOs nowadays, consistently voted as one of the top MMOs nowadays in the industry. That's why Todd is probably like, you know what? Let us do our space game. You don't need more ESO or Elder Scrolls stuff. You have ESO. We can do Starfield. And then later after that, we'll give you the Elder Scrolls 6. Maybe once, hypothetically, ESO has started to wind down. So that is what Todd had to say. So this is why there is a bit of focus on Zenimax Online Studios and the Elder Scrolls Online when it comes to anything Elder Scrolls. So again, Matt Firor was interviewed by Rock Paper Shotgun. You can see that interview in the description below, in addition to all the sources for this video, mind you. And they were chatting about ESO. They were chatting about the next expansion for ESO, specifically Gold Road, which comes out in June this year. And this is what Matt Firor had to say when essentially he was asked questions about the Elder Scrolls 6 and how they fit in with the franchise. Quote, "We've been kind of given freedom to develop our own lore-specific stories and settings for our particular part of the Elder Scrolls timeline. And we picked that timeline very carefully because there wasn't a lot for it previous to that. And so we've been given free reign from Bethesda. We have some rules, of course, for the IP, but other than that, we can flesh out the lore however we want. And that has led us to do really cool things, like go to Black Marsh and places that hadn't been in Elder Scrolls games before, or not since Arena in 1994, which is 30 years ago, which is crazy. So I think the freedom that we got from the Bethesda guys in the beginning kind of led to all the stuff that you're talking about because nobody really knew what Black Marsh was like, so we got to define that, tell some great stories. And we got to go to parts of Morrowind that weren't on the island of Vardenfell, which hadn't been in an Elder Scrolls game before. And then he was asked if he feels more of an ownership when it comes to the lore of the Elder Scrolls franchise, and he said, quote, "It's not ownership, but I know exactly what you're saying. It's definitely a partnership, and we are definitely equal partners at this point. I mean, they are the lore holders, and we have, a lore master that does nothing but make sure that the communication is correct. Things like place names and spellings are the things that lore lives and dies on. And we work with them every day doing that kind of stuff." And then he was asked if the team's wisdom had been sought out at all for the Elder Scrolls 6, and then he said the following, quote, "We do talk to the Bethesda guys all the time about lore, but also they made Fallout 76, and when you make online games at the same company, right, there's obviously a lot of talk and playtesting and stuff like that. So it's not official in the kind of way you're saying it, but there is lots of talk back and forth all the time, just about games, what's good, what's not, and not just our games, but other people's, like, have you played Palworld? There are those Slack threads that have all of that in them, and the collaboration just kind of gets built from there. and player trends are always shared amongst the groups, and anyone at Bethesda has access to our dashboards. So essentially, Matt Firewall there, in the face of a very hard question, again about Elder Scrolls 6, it's BGS and Todd Howard's baby. In the light of that question, he was pretty diplomatic and said, hey, no, we're equal partners, right? We don't own the lore of the Elder Scrolls. We are working on this franchise in tandem, in partnership with Bethesda Game Studios. But because of the nature of that, because we have a lore master that's talking to them all the time, and we're talking about lore and what we want to do and the areas we want to set our chapters in and all that kind of stuff, they have to talk about the Elder Scrolls together, right? They have to talk together about the lore of the franchise and all that stuff to make sure especially that the Zenimax Online team doesn't step on the toes of BGS with what they might potentially want to do with the Elder Scrolls 6. And obviously being in a very different timeline helps, as he said. But absolutely, they'd be talking about the Elder Scrolls 6, and pretty much Matt Firewall implies that, especially if BGS had an idea about the Elder Scrolls 6 and says, hey, what do you think about this? You've been dealing with the Elder Scrolls for so many years now. We haven't touched the Elder Scrolls as intensely as you have in the past few years. What do you think about this? There's probably a Slack thread for that kind of discussion. So I like hearing that. I like Matt Firewall saying, look, we're equal partners. We're not actively developing the Elder Scrolls 6. We're not, involved at the studios there at BGS. But absolutely, we're talking about this stuff from time to time. So I think that's very interesting to hear about how this game is being developed, how the lore is being developed, especially now as more people at BGS, as I said, are moving on towards Elder Scrolls 6. And those discussions are going to be coming up way more, especially now that, Zenimax Online Studios is still working on chapters for ESO with Gold Road and whatnot. And also as well, BGS are now working on Elder Scrolls 6. So they've never really had that before with ESO and Elder Scrolls 6 being developed at the same time. So I think that's pretty cool. So anyways, Wastelanders, let me know what you think about all of this in the comments below. I am absolutely losing my voice, so I apologize if I sounded a bit croaky towards the end. And until next time, this has been the Lone Wanderer. Please take care of yourself, and would you kindly keep fighting the good fight.